uprising.
This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. Get a load of this. I've discussed this before, and now it's resurfacing. It's still going on. Nothing has been done to stop it. It is unbelievable.
Some alarming new findings on a weed-killing chemical. A study by the Center for Environmental Health says 90% of families tested have it in their bodies, and most kids have more than their parents. Those findings come as the federal EPA weighs whether to reapprove that key ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup.
Reporter Julie Watts looks behind those numbers.
The Center for Environmental Health reached out to parents who've either researched or reported on chemicals in kids in the past, and we decided to take them up on the offer to test both me and my daughter for weed killers. It's not the first time a study found chemicals inside people's bodies, but it is the first time they compared the levels in kids to their parents. To say she takes her work home with her may be an understatement. As a pollution prevention director at the Center for Environmental Health, Sue Chang is careful about the food her son eats.
We've definitely been taking precautions, eating more organic cereal and food whenever we can.
She recently worked on a study that found the Roundup chemical Glyphosate in nearly 70% of the oat-based food items on school menus. So when CEH decided to test parents and children for the weed killer inside their bodies, she and her son volunteered.
Organic turkey sandwich.
Despite her best efforts, the lab found the weed-killing chemical used in Monsanto's Roundup in Gabe's body at much higher levels than his mom's. Were you surprised?
Because I worked on this issue, I was not necessarily surprised, but I'm definitely concerned.
She says in all, CEH used an independent lab to test a dozen parent-child pairs who all reported consciously trying to avoid pesticide exposure. Still, the lab found 9 of the children had higher levels than their parents, half had twice the amount as their parents, and one had nearly 100 times more weed killer in their body.
That doesn't surprise me.
Environmental health scientist Asa Bradman was not associated with the study, but says while glyphosate residue in food is likely the primary source, kids are also more likely to come in contact with the chemicals at schools or parks.
They often have higher exposures because they eat more, they drink more, and they breathe more per unit of body weight than adults.
Now, the active ingredient in Roundup is increasingly controversial after a jury found it caused cancer in a local school groundskeeper. Monsanto says the weed killer is safe and points to the EPA, which says there are no risks to children or adults from currently registered uses. But health advocates argue the EPA primarily looks at studies funded by Monsanto. Official positions differ. The World Health Organization has classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans. The European Food Safety Authority says it's unlikely to pose a carcinogenic threat, while the California EPA lists glyphosate as known to cause cancer.
You know, Monsanto says it doesn't cause cancer. The EPA says it's safe.
Does X amount of glyphosate mean you get this disease?
Well, some more study needs to be done, but the studies that have been done are showing serious health concerns.
While there are established occupational exposure limits for adults, there is no established safe level for kids for exposure or the amount of chemical inside their body.
Bottom line, should parents be nervous? Should parents be afraid?
No, I don't think parents should be afraid, but information gives people power.
Now, the Center for Environmental Health advises parents to buy organic whenever possible and talk to your schools about buying organic food and avoiding chemical weed killers on campus. We should note, as for our results, I actually had the lowest levels of any parent in the study. My daughter had the 4th lowest levels of all the children, but she still had significantly higher levels than me, and we have to assume, since we eat the same things at home, that she must have been exposed at school. Hey, nothing to be suspicious about here. It's just weed killer in your food, you know, but there's no government conspiracy going on. They don't want to depopulate. They don't want to make the pharmaceutical companies more money by making people sicker. No. It's all a huge misunderstanding. You've got to be kidding me, right? We already found out that they've been putting weed killer in Cheerios and other products, and now they're saying that weed killer is found in kids at higher levels than parents. So what do you think that means? That means they're targeting foods that kids are more likely to eat, and they're putting it in there. Does it sound like sacrifice to Moloch, to Baal? Or want to just say it's sacrifice to Satan? Remember, the children are the ones they target. So is it a coincidence that it's found in more kids, that kids are suffering from this?
Is it normal to have ingredients such as glyphosate or just flat out weed killer in your foods? Does anybody seem to get pissed off in this country and say, how does the FDA regulate this? Oh, this is happening by accident. Oh, what's the accident? What's the accident? Oh, well, you're going to tell us that the grains were covered with this chemical, and it was supposed to be cleaned up. I mean, what could you possibly tell people to make them accept this? It says the EPA is deciding whether to reapprove the weed-killing ingredient in Roundup for another 15 years. A new report finds 90% of the families tested that have that chemical in their bodies, and most kids had much more than their parents. The Center of Environmental Health, a nonprofit that is focused on protecting people from toxins, reached out to parents who have researched or reported on chemicals in kids in the past to ask if they wanted to participate in the biomonitoring study. CEH used an independent lab to test a dozen parent-child pairs who all reported consciously trying to avoid pesticide exposure. The lab found 9 of the children had higher concentrations of the weed killer in their body than their parents. Half of the children had twice the amount of glyphosate in their body as their parents, and one had nearly 100 times more weed killer in their body. Unbelievable. It was not the first biomonitoring study to find the weed killer in people's bodies, but it was the first to compare the amount in kids compared to their parents. Sue Chang, the pollution prevention director at the CEH, also participated in the study. She recently worked on a different CEH report that found the Roundup chemical glyphosate in nearly 70% of oat-based food items on school menus. She said, because I work on this issue, I was not necessarily surprised by the biomonitoring results, but I'm definitely concerned and disturbed. Yeah, you think? Chang says she is careful about the food her son Gabe eats and chooses organic food and cereal whenever they can. However, despite his best efforts, the lab found the weed-killing chemical used in Monsanto's Roundup in Gabe's body at much higher levels than his mom. They said that doesn't surprise me, and that's true actually for a lot of environmental contamination, said the environmental health scientist Asia Bradman. Nobody cares. Bradman studied pesticide exposures for decades. She said kids often have higher levels. Oh, why is that? Simply because they eat more, they drink more, she says. Clearly they're targeting foods that children eat. And 70% of the food in schools, I mean, are you kidding me? Is anybody get mad at anything anymore? Or what, is it hate speech to be mad that this is going on? I'm sorry, am I offending anyone? Are we offending Monsanto? Monsanto, of course, if you're not familiar with Monsanto, and how Monsanto was even promoted at CIA headquarters, aka also known as Disney, by the way, that Monsanto would have their hand in this. And then you hear these cases like, oh, Monsanto's getting sued. How about Monsanto's eliminated permanently? Oh, why? Because the elites own it and control these rich billionaires, the ones who want to depopulate. If they want to depopulate so much, why don't they start by looking in the mirror? And then they do the world a real favor. They are targeting children with these poisons. That is very clear. They are targeting us with these poisons. That is even more clear. Pick up a box, even if you don't eat any of this type of food. Go to the grocery store and pick up a box. Take a picture of it, of the ingredient list. And then go home and compare side by sides. Google, Cheerios from the 1960s or whatever product you decide to take a picture of, and look at the difference in the chemicals that are in there. That is why, you talk about people growing up in the 60s and 70s compared to growing up now, we're a lot healthier. Didn't suffer through depression, anxiety. The fertility rates weren't as low as they are now. Because they're just dumping poisons because nobody's paying attention and nobody cares. They're more concerned with what they're going to post on their Instagram today so that people give them little hearts. That's what they care about. Because they can't see it directly happening to them in real time because it's not affecting them directly. Right? Even though it is affecting them directly. Like if they ate it and suddenly had a stroke and went into the hospital, do something about it. But instead, because it's a slow death, a silent death, silent punishment to your body, which is your temple, and an immediate attack on children who are still developing, right? Children who are developing, they're growing, and they're sticking weed killer in them. That's why, so these kids can get cancer at 20, and then everybody can go, I can't believe God would do this to all these people. Because that's the only time, like I always say, they only reference God when something bad happens. They go, how could God do this? Your government's doing it. The FDA is doing it. Weed killer. They're like, oh, well, they're deciding 95, what was the exact quote? Let me scroll back up. The EPA has to decide whether to reapprove the weed-killing ingredient in Roundup for another 15 years. Why don't we weigh the pros and cons? How about screw the EPA? How about screw Roundup? How about screw Monsanto? How about people get pissed off? Anybody sick and tired of getting chemicals dumped on them? Anyone sick and tired of being depressed, having anxiety? You know where all this stuff comes from? It comes from these chemicals, because you know what? When you hear the word chemicals, you think immediately, that's something I'd like to eat. No, you don't. So why are there chemicals in our foods? Why is there weed killer and Roundup in more children's foods? The sooner people get their heads out of their rear ends, the sooner something can be done. But unfortunately, no one seems to care. And that's how they continue to win this silent war. And then they come out and they go, oh, these crazy conspiracy nuts. Yeah, we're so crazy. We're so nuts. Oh, these are all just things that happen accidentally, right? Yeah, all the chemicals listed on the side of the box are an accident. Weed killer, just an accident. Not to mention how it's targeting children's foods. What are you going to tell me? Oh, well, because children are more likely to eat Cheerios? Oh, because adults don't eat Cheerios? Adults don't eat cereal? Of course they're targeting children's foods, because they're sacrifices to Baal. And it goes back to their ultimate agenda, which is depopulation. So continue to make people sick, continue to give people depression, anxiety, all types of, illnesses, spreading illnesses, all just bizarre things that continue to pop up. Keep doing that while the pharmaceutical companies keep making money, while the elites keep having their own vaccinations to be immune to this stuff, the actual vaccinations that actually help the body, give us the vaccinations that give us the diseases, and everybody just thinks everything in this world is okay. You got Henry Kissinger living to 100, George Bush dying at 95, Jimmy Carter having inoperable brain cancer removed at 90-something years old. These people are immune to this stuff. Meanwhile, we're sticking weed killer in our bodies. They're poisoning our children in the school systems with these foods. I wonder why 70% of the food in the school system all happens to be polluted with this crap. All the stuff on the menu. Yeah, because who do you think's pumping it into the schools? Monsanto themselves. What a joke. And thank you for listening to today's show. This world is just unbelievable. God bless you and your families.